Something strange is happening in public conversation about gender. For some people, feminism means equality and a fairer world. For others, feminism now looks like a movement that sometimes tolerates, or even encourages, explicit anti-male sentiment. There's a phrase buzzing across social feeds, comment threads, and late-night arguments: toxic feminism. Some say it's an imagined grievance, a strawman used to discredit equal rights movements. Others insist it's very real, and that parts of modern feminism have mutated into something new, an ideology that sometimes demonizes men, excuses misandry, and tolerates double standards. Today we'll examine the claims, show concrete examples, weigh peer-reviewed research and court rulings, along with real-world consequences. We'll ask, when does advocacy become prejudice? If parts of feminism have gone toxic, what does that cost men, women, and the cause of equality itself? Comment as you watch. This subject needs debate. To have a useful conversation, we must define our terms. Feminism equals a broad set of beliefs and movements seeking greater political, economic, and social equality for women. Most major feminist organizations, activists, and scholars still articulate goals that include equal pay, reproductive rights, and an end to gender-based violence. Feminism, to us at Matt Knows, is the belief in political, economic, and social equality between the sexes and is something that we wholeheartedly support. Toxic feminism equals strands, spaces or behaviors associated with feminism that move beyond criticism of patriarchy and into generalized hostility toward men, public shaming, exclusionary practices presented as justice, or rhetoric that reduces men to villains by default. Toxic feminism, as critics use the term, does not mean feminism as a whole. Instead, it describes certain behaviors or rhetoric. Public shaming, blanket hostility toward all men, organizational exclusion that verges on discrimination, or the elevation of identity and victim status above dialogue and due process. Misandry equals hostility or contempt for men. Recent academic work has identified misandry as a measurable phenomenon in online communities. Misandry is the counterpart to misogyny, hostility toward men. Scholars debate how common or institutionally significant misandry is compared with misogyny. Some peer-reviewed studies show online communities that express male hate exist and have unique linguistic fingerprints, meaning misandry is real in some corners of the internet, but most major social scientists caution against treating these pockets as representative of feminism at large. Across the last decade, a series of controversies has fed claims that feminism has turned toxic, or at least that some activists and spaces have. Here are some documented examples. First, legal and policy disputes about women-only spaces. Courts and tribunals in several countries have had to decide when women-only spaces are lawful and when they cross into unlawful discrimination. In Tasmania, for instance, a civil tribunal found that refusing a man entry to a women's-only lounge constituted discrimination under local law, a ruling that sparked public debate about safety, fairness, and exclusion. Cases like this show the tension between protecting vulnerable groups and creating exclusionary policies. Second, social media culture and public shaming. Viral campaigns and call-outs sometimes report harassment and demand accountability, and sometimes they look less like justice and more like collective punishment. Critics point to instances where accusations spread widely without due process, and where entire careers or reputations are damaged before facts are established. These sorts of episodes are often described as toxic because they prioritize moral certainty over investigation. Third, rhetoric that can sound blanket or absolute. In commercial media and some activist spaces, we sometimes hear language that generalizes about all men, or treats male experience as uniformly problematic. That rhetoric alienates potential allies, and when amplified it can harden into discrimination rather than reform. Fourth, online subcultures on both sides. There are documented online communities with extreme misandry, groups that explicitly advocate hatred toward men. These are signs of polarization, and can produce harmful content. A cross-community academic analysis found misandric and misogyny groups that share structural traits, showing that gender-based hate can flourish online in multiple directions. There's been important academic work that complicates easy conclusions. A multidisciplinary analysis of gendered hate speech online shows misandry exists and can be studied as a distinct phenomenon. That study identified that misandry is underexplored and sometimes concentrated in particular online communities. The takeaway was that misandry is not merely an internet myth, it exists and can be hostile and influential. At the same time, researchers have tested the suggestion that feminists hate men. Large university studies and social psychological work call this the misandry myth, the idea that feminism broadly equates to hatred of men. Multiple studies have found that the stereotype is inaccurate. Most people who identify as feminists do not endorse hatred toward men, rather, they support systemic change and equality. Put simply, anti-male hate exists on the internet and in some activist pockets. But the largest, peer-reviewed evidence says feminism as a movement is not primarily motivated by hatred of men. So if toxic behavior shows up, how does it spread? 4 mechanisms are prominent. 1. Platform economics. Outrage spreads faster than nuance. Social networks and virality. Controversial posts reward attention. Outrage gets clicks and shares, that means extreme statements move faster than nuanced ones. 2. Institutional bandwagons. Organizations sometimes prioritize symbolic programs that can be marketed, rather than structural change. Institutional incentives. Some organizations and influencers are rewarded by binary narratives, villainize a group, rally supporters, and grow an audience. Over time, incentives can warp messaging toward extremes. 3. Grievance economies. Online communities reward confirmation and radicalization. Grievance economies. People with real grievances find confirmation online, and communities can turn a legitimate complaint into a broader ideology of animus. 4. Cultural escalation. When one side oversimplifies the other, reaction intensifies. A feedback loop that radicalizes both extremes. Reactionary backlash. Where feminism challenges privilege, some groups and institutions react by caricaturing feminists as anti-male. That backlash both fuels polarization and enables extremists on both sides. Example 1. Women-only training in business networks. Here's an ad from Facebook for a free ChatGPT masterclass, pitched specifically at female solopreneurs. It's the kind of women-only training and networking event that has multiplied in the last decade. These groups are often offered with good intentions, to correct historic imbalances and create safe forums. But they also raise 2 issues. First, exclusion. When organizations or businesses make training, fast-track management programs, or networking explicitly women-only, men are formally barred from the same access. That exclusion is frequently defended as necessary to counterbalance imbalances, but in many jurisdictions it triggers legal and ethical questions about discrimination and equal treatment. Legal scholars have documented the friction between the value of women-only forums and anti-discrimination statutes. Second, optics and resentment. When the public sees consistent, structured advantages available only to women. Mentorship pipelines, accelerated promotion tracks, or exclusive business networks, the reaction among excluded groups can be anger and perceptions of institutional bias. That resentment fuels polarization, and it fuels claims that feminism today is less about equality and more about preferential treatment. Example 2. Corporate programs that create perceived advantages. Major companies now fund women's leadership programs and sponsorship networks designed to accelerate female careers. Trustpilot, for example, has spoken publicly about internal initiatives to support women in leadership, programs that provide access to mentoring, development, and sponsorship aimed specifically at women. Many companies believe these programs close gaps, and they often help. But critics argue they can create perceptions of double standards if men aren't offered parallel opportunities, especially at senior levels where promotion pipelines are tightly contested. Why this matters, whether or not those programs are fair or necessary, the perception of systemic preferential access feeds the narrative that modern feminism sometimes adopts policies that advantage women to the disadvantage of men. Example 3. Online evidence of anti-male sentiment. Beyond corporate programs, there is a clear online ecosystem where anti-male language and communities exist. Investigative and academic work has documented communities with explicit anti-male rhetoric, and some studies even find pockets of online misandric sentiment that can be vitriolic. This isn't just ironic humor, in some forums it moves into harassment, doxing, and concerted public shaming of individual men. Platforms have struggled with what to do. During #MeToo, for instance, content moderators at major platforms grappled with posts that read things like "men are scum," raising difficult questions about hate speech, advocacy, and the boundaries of permissible content. The public story about how platforms treated those phrases shows that anti-male language has been visible enough to challenge moderation policy. Example 4. Tools that encourage public shaming of men. New apps and services have grown up around the desire to warn one another about dangerous people, but some of these tools blur the line between safety and mass defamation. A recent app described as a Yelp for men lets people publicly review men they've dated. Supporters say it protects women, critics say it invites false accusations and public shaming with limited recourse. Regardless of intent, these products turn private grievances into mass, searchable reputational harm, and those dynamics disproportionately affect men in the public eye. Example 5. Examples and reported controversies. Women-only events and complaints. Men have brought legal complaints when excluded from women-only events or spaces, sometimes successfully. These cases create headlines where characterizing feminism as exclusionary can gain traction. Corporate women's leadership initiatives, companies documenting female leadership programs, like the Trustpilot example, create narratives of special pipelines for women, perceived by some as fast tracks unavailable to men, whether or not the programs are justified by evidence. Platforms and moderation controversies. Platforms have publicly debated whether anti-male phrases are hate speech, illustrating the visibility and intensity of such language online. Important caveat: large-scale social science consistently finds that feminism as a movement is not primarily about hating men. So the existence of anti-male sentiment in pockets of activism or online does not equal institutional feminist hostility. But scholarship also shows misandry exists in measurable forms online and that it's understudied compared with misogyny. That means we cannot simply dismiss anti-male communities as jokes; they can be real, organized, and harmful. When rhetoric hardens into exclusionary practice or unnuanced public narratives, several harms may follow. First, men who genuinely need support may avoid services. If conversations about male vulnerability become dominated by ridicule, men may be less likely to seek help or speak up about abuse and mental health. Men who are victims of abuse may avoid reporting for fear of ridicule or being dismissed. If public discussion assumes men are perpetrators rather than potential victims, help-seeking declines. That's a social cost. Second, the possibility of double standards. If a movement defends gender equality but simultaneously endorses an ends justify the means approach to silencing critics, it invites critiques of hypocrisy. Due process problems. Public shaming via social media or apps can wreck livelihoods without formal investigation, prompting wrongful terminations and legal battles. Third, diminished coalition building. Social change often succeeds when broad coalitions form. If a portion of feminist discourse becomes hostile to men generally, it becomes harder to form coalitions with progressive men or with institutions necessary for structural reform. Eroded coalition building. Movements that cast an entire gender as the enemy lose potential allies who could help pass policy reforms like parental leave, mental health funding for men, or reforms in family courts. Backlash. Perceived unfairness fuels a reactionary backlash where extreme anti-feminist groups attract recruits, polarizing the political environment. I want to emphasize, these are observations about consequences, not arguments that equality itself is wrong. Every movement has fringe elements. The question is whether fringe behavior is being treated as central, and whether leaders are accountable when their rhetoric fuels harm. Let's look at 3 concrete situations. Case 1, the Tasmanian Ladies' Lounge dispute. The legal finding that a man was discriminated against when denied entry to a women-only lounge provoked outrage and conversation. When are women-only spaces necessary for safety and privacy, and when do they become exclusionary in a way the law cannot tolerate? The tribunal's ruling demonstrates the difficulty of drawing bright lines in a nuanced area. Case 2, women-only commercial ventures and trans inclusion controversies. In recent years, gyms, clubs, and events branded as women only have prompted debate about who counts as a woman and how to balance safety, inclusion, and non-discrimination. Those debates are often framed as protecting women, but they also raise legal and ethical questions the public is still sorting through. Reporting shows different jurisdictions and organizations reach different decisions, reflecting the complexity of the issue. Case 3. Online call-out culture and deplatforming. High-profile firings and cancellations following public accusations have raised worries about due process and disproportionate punishment. Journalists and commentators argue that while some call-outs are necessary to hold powerful figures to account, others are misused for reputation-destroying mob action. The media ecosystem rewards the loudest narratives, not the most accurate. It's essential to present the other side fairly. Many scholars and activists insist that what critics call toxic feminism is not feminism, it's a small, noisy fringe. Many academics and feminist scholars argue that labeling toxic feminism as representative of the movement is misleading. They say, most feminists are working to remedy structural inequality and are not anti-male. Research from respected universities emphasizes that the stereotype of feminists hating men is empirically weak and politically convenient for opponents of equality. Complaints about toxic feminism can conflate accountability with hostility. When individuals or institutions are criticized for sexist behavior, some interpret that as hatred, others see it as an attempt to enforce standards. The women-only program's aim is corrective. They are created because standard pipelines have repeatedly failed women, and research shows tailored development can increase representation. Supporters argue the goal is parity, not advantage. Finally, critics say focusing on misandry can be a tactic to derail discussion of systemic misogyny, an attempt to relativize structural harms that overwhelmingly disadvantage women. These counterarguments matter. A fair investigation must weigh them carefully, because otherwise criticism slides easily into scapegoating. Not everything critics point at is the same. There are 3 categories we need to keep separate. Category A, legitimate activism that challenges measurable disparities and demands institutional reform. These are evidence-based policy fights, pay equity, parental leave, violence prevention. These have empirical support when designed well. Category B, hardline rhetoric that paints all men as oppressors. Online harassment and shaming culture that weaponizes allegations without process. This is divisive and counterproductive. Category C, misconduct or exclusion that looks discriminatory in daily life, for example, women-only benefits or spaces that might illegally exclude men. Understanding where a given action sits helps us evaluate whether we're witnessing essential reform or harmful excess. If the goal is to preserve feminism's legitimacy while reducing harm, toxic dynamics, and make progressive change more durable, here are practical steps both movements can consider. 1. Distinguish accountability from collective punishment. Demand transparent investigations and proportional responses. 2. Protect legitimate women-only spaces where safety and privacy are demonstrably required, while designing processes for fair accessibility in line with local law. 3. Reject blanket statements that demonize a whole gender. Paint with nuance. 4. Promote cross-gender coalitions to tackle structural issues like paid family leave, divorce law reform, and mental health services for men, problems that benefit from diverse partnerships. 5. Platform responsible voices who can translate nuanced research into clear policy. 6. Establish fair, independent complaint processes for allegations raised on social platforms or apps, including clear routes for review and appeal. 7. Promote media literacy so viral accusations are treated with healthy skepticism until verified. 8. Design women-focused programs with transparency, explain selection, goals, duration, and evaluation metrics. And create parallel avenues for men. These are not radical compromises, they are tools for building durable reform. The law and ethics often collide in these debates. Civil liberties groups have questioned whether women-only policies can be exclusionary or discriminatory under human rights statutes. At the same time, civil rights groups counsel that protecting minority spaces sometimes requires careful exemptions and tight definitions. Policy debates must confront trade-offs, safety versus access, accountability versus fairness. The public conversation too often reduces these trade-offs to slogans. A mature debate must name them explicitly. There's a danger on both sides of the culture war, weaponizing myths. For those who oppose feminist goals, exaggerating toxic feminism as all-powerful becomes a political tool to stop structural progress. For activists, denying that problematic rhetoric exists at all erodes credibility. Both extremes stunt productive reform. Social change succeeds when movements hold themselves accountable, and when critics offer constructive alternatives rather than caricature-based attacks. Many feminist activists publicly condemn misandry and exclusionary rhetoric. They argue the movement's core values are equality and the elimination of gendered harm for everyone. Others, frustrated by slow progress, adopt strident rhetoric to signal urgency. Both voices appear within feminist gatherings, peer networks, and academic forums. So what's the bottom line? If your definition of feminism is the movement for gender equality, then the balance of evidence shows that feminism as a broad social project is not inherently anti-male. If your concern is that certain pockets, social media subcultures, or organizational practices can display exclusionary or hostile rhetoric toward men, that concern is real and documented. Examples include online misandric communities and specific legal controversies about exclusionary policies. The honest answer is, both are true. Feminism in the mainstream remains committed to equality. Pockets of toxicity and poor rhetoric exist and deserve scrutiny. Calling out those pockets is legitimate, but we must avoid letting those pockets define the entire movement. Two truths can coexist. Mainstream feminism continues to pursue equality, and yet pockets of anti-male sentiment and exclusionary practice do exist and cause harm. Treating fringe hostility as the whole movement is dishonest. Ignoring fringe hostility is dangerous for the movement's credibility. The remedy is accountability, clarity, and policy design that reduces harm while preserving redress. If you watch to the end, good. Now do 3 things: comment with your best evidenced argument, share the video so more people can weigh in, and subscribe if you want more investigations that dig into controversial topics. Thanks for watching. Debate below, keep it civil, keep it sourced, and let's see where the evidence leads us.